Let's see how we can use debug.assert in the web application. This is the same code from the previous module. I'm inside the expense repository. This is the class that calls the database to retrieve expense information. I've already added a using statement for system.diagnostics. Let's scroll down to the method that's called for the report page, getMonthlyExpenses. Let's insert a line at the start of the method and call debug.assert. There are several overloads. We can just include a condition to evaluate, or this overload was added in .NET 6 to improve performance. It only evaluates any interpolated string formatting items if the message is required. String interpolation is when you prepend the string with a $sign and include any variables and expressions in curly brackets right in the string itself. They get evaluated and the string is produced. This overload just makes sure that doesn't happen when the assert is passing, only when it fails. And there are overloads that allow you to include a short message and optionally also a longer message. Remember, these messages get output to the trace listeners that are attached to the trace class, and that collection is also used by the debug class. Unless you specify trace listeners, only the output window is used by the default trace listener. Let's add a condition that user ID is not equal to 0. This is a little confusing because you're not entering a condition here that should be true in order to cause the debugger to break and output this message. The condition here is your assumption of what is expected. In other words, it's what should happen in order to successfully continue. If this condition is not met, that's when the debugger will break. Let's go over to the code that's going to call this method. That's in the report page code behind. At the top, I have the user ID hard-coded. Remember, this is just during development because we haven't implemented security and logins yet. Down in the onGet method, the expense repository method gets called, passing in the hard-coded user ID. Let's run the app. When it opens, I'll go to the reports page and run the report for the current month. Even though there's no expenses returned, the repository code still got called, and as expected, the debug.assert condition passed. Let's close this to stop debugging, and go up to the top of the report page, and let's change this user ID value to 0. That should cause the assert condition to fail, because remember, it's expecting that the user ID is a non-zero value. Let's run the same report. And now the debugger breaks at the assert line. If I hover over the user ID, the value is 0. I'll hit F10 to continue to the next line. That will cause the message to be sent to the trace listeners. If I open up the output window and scroll up a bit, there's the message. It says debug assertion failed, and the short message we added to the method. So that's how you can add assert statements to your code to clarify and enforce the logic and intention of the code. Next, let's look at some attributes you can add in code that affect the debugger.